Welcome back to the Bulkhead. I'm Kale.
I'm Brett.
And today we have a deck tech on Atraxa Praetors Voice, which is a super interesting 4-color commander that works for a variety of different play styles, as well as a variety of different types of decks. There's a lot that you can do with this card. You initially built the deck, so I'll leave it to you to talk about that.
So this is the most interesting deck story I have. I have like 7 commander decks right now, and this is by far probably my favorite one just because of what happened to it. So initially it was like a very spiky planeswalker-centric classic Atraxa build. I was playing planeswalkers with doubling seasons down and ultimating them.
Yeah.
And just like the fun level was not there. It was definitely a shunned deck in our play group. I think you can agree with that.
I played the deck, I think, once, and everybody was already sick of it.
Yeah.
And it felt to me like, actually, I think I played it twice, and the first time I definitely did just get to like combo ultimate into something, and it's awesome.
Oh, you ultimated Tameo, right?
I did, yeah. And then we made
Omniscience.
the Omniscience emblem, and I was kind of playing with myself for a little bit after that, drawing cards and playing stuff, and people get pretty tired of that pretty quickly. It's fun to do once.
It is extremely fun to do once. I highly recommend anyone to do it, try it at least once, for sure, but it gets old very, very quick.
Yeah, maybe go down to your local game store and play with some randos, and not necessarily
don't torment your friends,
your play group that you love necessarily.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's get into some of the nitty gritty of the decks. We'll go through, pick out a couple specifics from the general groups I have laid out right here.
Yeah.
So for lands, there's like 9 different lands that have to do with counters. We have the Depletion Cycle from Mercadian Mass, and then we have the Vivid Cycle and Gemstone Mine. All of them need counters to be relevant, and so being able to constantly put counters on them and having them function throughout the whole game is invaluable. And that's why they're actually really good in this. They're all basically have 5 rainbow lands and then 4 ancient tombs.
Oftentimes when you're playing a 4-color deck, you want to be playing like triomes and stuff, but in this deck, you obviously get this added flexibility of playing the Vivid lands, which are 5-color lands, as well as Gemstone Mine. And I think that's like a really important like departure from normal like sort of 4-color mana base like fetch, shock, triome sort of like craziness. And then obviously the depletion lands are like super, super cool because you can't play them in any type of deck necessarily because they will run out of counters and be useless and die. But when you have Atraxa and all these different sources of proliferation, these end up functioning as ancient tombs for the whole game, which is obviously super busted. Anytime you can break a fundamental rule of Magic and have a land that taps for 2 mana, or play additional lands during a turn, you definitely know that you're doing something worthwhile.
Moving on, we have some cards that have to do with +1/+1 counters. Cathars Crusade, buffing your team. You have like Simic Mimic, stealing creatures from other players. But one we really like to highlight out here is Sage of Hours. It's a generic in blue for a 1/1 human wizard. It has Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Sage of Hours, but +1/+1 counter, remove all +1/+1 counters from Sage of Hours. For each 5 removed this way, take an extra turn.
Which is like, I remember this card when it came out in Standard, and people were like psyched to play it, but it's not necessarily of the power level that it needs to be in a 1v1 format. And it's very difficult to pull off without like this much synergy involved. But when you do get an insane payoff, when you get to remove even just 5, but potentially as many as 10, 15 counters, I think that's probably possible in this deck.
Oh yeah.
Certainly with Doubling Season, Deepglow Skate, and all of those things that actually like double counters. And so I was really psyched to see this card. I think I played Blue-White Heroic when it was in Standard for a little while. Yeah. And this was I believe this was a one-of in the sideboard. I never knew when to bring it in because it felt like it would just die every time. But I always wanted to bring it in every matchup. I'm like, you have 7 shocks in your deck, but I could maybe take an extra turn if I have enough God's Willings.
Yep, fair enough.
So it's super cool to see in this deck.
Let's see, moving on, we have stuff with -1/-1 counters. Contagion Clasp, Contagion Engine, Grim Affliction. This is like kind of a pseudo removal for the deck. But a little bit different of the removal aspect is Wickerbow Elder. It's a 3 generic and green for a 4/4 Treefolk Shaman. It comes into play with 1 -1/-1 counter on it. You tap a green, remove a -1/-1 counter on it, you destroy target artifact or enchantment. So stacking this creature up with -1/-1 counters is actually excellent, because then you just have a repeatable source, or you have a repeatable disenchant basically.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Or actually it's better than disenchant because it's only green.
Yeah, and this is sort of like the interesting place that like Atraxa occupies, whereas like you would probably in most decks play like a Reclamation Sage or something like this. You get to play Wickerbow Elder, and it has a higher ceiling in this deck because you get repeatable activations of it, and it's kind of like a little bit sneaky, you know, and underplayed, and that's always something fun in Commander, to find a diamond in the rough.
I think that's another reason why I like this deck. A lot of these cards I don't play with just in general, or like in EDH or any other formats really.
Yeah.
I definitely have decks where cards overlap, but this one has a lot of just like very unique cards to this deck.
Yeah.
Alright, we do have like a kind of generic ramp package. All the 2-drop ramp spells like Rampant Growth, Nature's Lore, Secure Tribe Elder. But the couple that are extremely good are Astral Cornucopia.
Cornucopia!
And As Foretold. So let's start with Cornucopia first. It is XXX for its casting cost. It is an artifact, and it enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. So you pay 3, comes in with 1 charge counter, and you tap it, choose a color, add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool for each charge counter on it. Playing this last night, actually, I think I ended the game with over 10 charge counters on it. So,
which obviously is pretty good.
Yeah, you know, it's not bad for 3 mana. You do have to invest the initial 3 mana, but by the end of the game, when this is tapping for, 8, 9, 10 mana, I don't think you can argue about it.
Yeah. And that's one that's not as often seen, but makes sense a lot in this deck too, because it does add colored mana as opposed to something like Everflowing Chalice, which would technically be a combo with Atraxa, but would not necessarily work because there is a lot of like heavier mana requirements in this deck, especially when we move over to this wonderful section over here.
Yeah, and you want to be casting Atraxa every single time in this light. It's like a commander you always want out. So yeah, having your mana rocks being able to tap for mana or colored mana is definitely important.
Yeah.
And the As Foretold is just crazy sometimes. Not even As Foretold is crazy. 2 generic and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold. Once per turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with convert mana cost X or less, where X is the number of time counters on As Foretold. The following turn after you play this, you play your 1-drops for free, go. But Atraxa speeding this process up.
Yeah. So, if you have a proliferation source in play, you get to start playing giant nasty things for free at any point.
Very quickly.
Yeah. And As Foretold is just awesome.
Yeah.
Like, it just makes you feel you're like, oh, 5 counters? Here we go.
Yep.
You know, and I also think that when I played this as the Planeswalker version, obviously 4 mana for your commander that does nothing when it comes into play. If people want to be mean to you, they can.
Oh, yeah.
So it's nice to have something like As Foretold that continues to get better over the game and will allow you to play these more expensive spells, even if you have to be spending 6 or 8 mana to get Atraxa back into play.
Yep, 100%. We counted before we started this, and there's about 14 different types of counters. And with all those types of counters, obviously Atraxa having Proliferate on it, we wanted to put in a bunch of Proliferate cards. So we have 12 cards with the word Proliferate on them. Some of the best being Evolution Sage, Flux Channeler, both all-star creatures. But want to highlight a relatively newer card, I guess, Sword of Truth and Justice. 3 mana artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and blue. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it and then proliferate. And it equips for 2. So having the repeatable source of proliferation, like Atraxa has, is just really key for this deck.
Yep.
It really gets things going out of control extremely quickly.
Yep.
Beefing your creature up and giving it protection, obviously just also great.
Sometimes randomly protection from a specific set of colors is just like good.
Oh yeah.
In a random game as well too. You might be playing against a mono blue deck and a mono white deck at the same time, and you're just like, woohoo!
Yeah,
you know?
winning.
You guys can't really do anything to me because if I put this on Atraxa, I have a Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink 6/6 that's proliferating and adding counters when it hits and then at end of turn. So things can really spiral out of control like pretty quickly. I also love in this deck Inexorable Tide, which is this 5-mana enchantment that lets you proliferate whenever you cast a spell. A lot of what I enjoy about EDH is playing some of these cards that I know about from, you know, before, like when they were in Standard, or when I started playing again, I started playing during Scars of Mirrodin. And this card was always interesting, but it's not necessarily like good enough to play in like 60 card formats. But in Commander, it's absolutely super, super powerful, especially when you're doing things like putting 10 counters on Astral Cornucopia and then proliferating, you know, whenever you're casting spells and just steamrolling out through the game. And I really love how some of these like repeatable proliferate effects do that. You know, Evolution Sage and Flux Channeler, obviously also very powerful.
I really like what you said about seeing cards you saw when you were playing 60 card formats.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we both came up from a spot that was very spiky oriented. Play Modern, Legacy.
Yes.
And then, coming to EDH and be able to play with these. They're good cards. They just need a format to thrive in. Yeah. And it's nice to have this, to be able to play with all these Magic cards for sure.
Yeah, that's part of what is great about EDH, obviously. It gives a home to every single card, essentially.
Yeah, speaking of, we have almost a full cycle, but with 4 of the 5 of the original Meogens. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I will say the white one is a 8 mana, 5 generic, 3 white, 4/6 creature, Spirit. When it comes into play, if you cast it from your hand, it comes in with a Divinity counter. And as long as it has a Divinity counter on it, it's indestructible. You can remove a Divinity counter to destroy all creatures.
Yeah. So which is instant speed too.
Instant speed. You can remove the Divinity counter anytime you want. When you can proliferate, you have 2 Divinity counters on it, and then you have instant speed, Wrath of God.
Yeah, just open to you all the time. And that's like an absolutely just like mind-blowingly fun interaction. Like the blue one lets you draw a card for each permanent you control. The green one lets you just dump your hand of creatures into play. Yep. The black one is,
terrifying.
Obnoxious.
Yeah.
It makes your opponents discard their hand.
Locks them out of the game. If you want.
And so like these cards were like awesome when I got back into playing because they're huge. They're like really bad in general.
I would not recommend these cards outside of this deck. I think paying 8 mana for a 4/6 that you can wrap once. That's I mean, no, it's just no. But being able to do it multiple times and locking the board down is busted.
And threat of activation as well too.
Oh yeah.
People aren't gonna mess with you when you're like, well, if you attack me, I could wrath everything away except for this Meogen, which will stay because it has a Divinity counter on it still and will proliferate again, or I'll make you discard the rest of your hand. Which is always something that I think is like super invaluable because it's almost like you can hold the whole table hostage if you just have like one activation available that will either kill somebody or do incalculable damage to their deck. And so they end up having to like make other deals with other people if they want to get out from under it. Which is like, I love like a game warping like legendary cycle of spirits
that costs like 10
a million mana,
8 to 10 mana,
not 9,000
like you have to put the investment in and the setup has to be there, but when it feels great and you're just destroying people. Next spotlight card we have is Parallax Wave. It is a 2 generic white enchantment with fading 5. Remove a fade counter from Parallax Wave and remove target creature from the game. When Parallax Wave leaves play, each player returns to play all cards he or she owns removed from the game with Parallax Wave.
And so nobody knows what fading does. It removes a counter at the beginning of each upkeep. When it has no counters left on it, it has text on it that says that Parallax Wave leaves play.
Yep, exactly.
It's great that they don't have reminder text on this card.
Nemesis. But without the counter support, I would want to say it's not great. All right, well, you're playing 4 mana for not like a permanent answer of creatures.
You can blink some stuff or fog an attack or whatever.
But it's limited. It's going to end very soon. But when you're proliferating and adding counters to it, it becomes a permanent source of removal. You're just O-ringing creatures basically, left and right, saving your creatures if you need to for later. It gives you a ton of flexibility for 4 mana. It's not bad. Oh, it's Fairy's Protection, kind of.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier.
It almost feels like a planeswalker, sort of like in some way.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can activate it at instant speed, but it just has this like flexibility of different options of how you can interact with creatures and, you know, protect your own board, like you were saying, like a Teferi's Protection. Super underplayed, super cheap.
Yeah.
And just like really fun to like slap down at the table and then just say like, you guys can figure out what to do because I can do anything.
I will say this about the card: if you play with a group that hasn't experienced a Parallax Wave in the right kind of deck, they won't worry about it. In our play group, I play this and I just get the
you're like whatever. My turn.
Yeah. It's just like kind of in the same vein. From Nemesis, it's a 4 generic and green enchantment with fading 7. You remove a fade counter from Sapling Burst, put a green sapling creature token onto play. It has this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of fade counters on Sapling Burst. When Sapling Burst leaves play, destroy all tokens in play with Sapling Burst. So it just basically gives you an instant speed army if you want.
Army in a can,
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Survives all board wipe or creature board wipes. You can have as many creatures as you need, or just extremely beefy creature.
Yeah.
It gives you a lot of flexibility. There's also Parallax Tide, which is a blue one that when you remove fading counters, removes lands from the game.
Yeah.
And there's Parallax Nexus, which is the black one, and it removes cards from hand.
Yeah. And we're glad that you're not playing those in this deck.
Yeah. not right now, at least. Not right now. But yeah, I think they're all super underplayed, underappreciated. Just need a little help to be absolutely busted. So we got Magistrate Scepter. It's a 3 mana artifact, and then you tap it, tap 4 generic. You put a charge counter on it, and then when there are 3 charge counters on it, you can tap it and remove all the charge counters and take another turn.
It's like Time Vault Light.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah,
and it costs 7 mana to do it or whatever.
Yeah,
but
you do have to at least activate it once. It's definitely a 7 mana investment.
Probably abusable in some sort of charge counter deck.
In
different ways.
There are like weirdly a strange amount of cards that specifically talk about charge counters.
Yeah. Which is like a cool thread throughout Magic's like history or whatever.
It is.
This seems like a really annoying card in this deck, but not necessarily like something like Expropriate, which is like, take 3 extra turns or whatever, take all the permanents or whatever.
Yep.
Which is like something that I really like enjoy, and we've mentioned this a lot, like a little bit lower of a power level and a little bit less of like auto-include cards, where it's like Magistrate Scepter, you're not going to play this in a lot of different decks, but you absolutely will play it in a Proliferate deck because of the possibility of, if you have multiple sources of Proliferate that are repeatable, you could theoretically go infinite.
And it makes it feel like, taking turns is definitely it's abusive in a way, kind of like taking a bunch of turns is not the most fun. But it makes, for me at least, it makes me feel better about it when I have to invest the 7 mana, have a couple turns probably go by to get the 3 charge counters. Like, the investment's there for something overpowered.
And people at any point can interact with this. It's an artifact. People can still be pissed off about it, but I don't necessarily know that I would say that it's inherently unfair in any capacity, even though you take extra turns.
Yeah, I think that the unfair is the perfect word for it. I think Expropriate can be unfair sometimes, but like you can't. You're like
9 mana win the game or whatever.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Last spotlight card we want to mention is Ichor Rats. For a generic and 2 black, you get a 2/1 rat creature with Infect. But the best part is when it enters play, everyone gets a poison counter, and that 1 poison counter everyone gets can easily end up being the game is over.
The death of everyone.
Yeah, for the death of everyone. I've won with Infect, so I have 2 Infect cards actually. So it's Ichor Rats and then Phyrexian Swarmlord. Only cards with Infect in the whole entire deck. And I want to say at least 2 or 3 of these, the ones I've had with this, have been just from the Ichor Rat. 1 Ichor Rat poison counter.
Yep. It's a really innocuous card. Alex plays it in his Skitherix deck. And it always does sort of like feel like, oh, it's just 1 poison counter, that's okay on turn 3.
It's never 1.
But no, it's never just 1. First of all, he has some Proliferate in that deck. Second of all, he's beating you down with Infect counters. But obviously, I imagine it may be even a little bit more innocuous here, or at least sort of like uninteractable in terms of like, you play the Ichor Rats, the counter's there, the rest of the deck is going to swirl around it, And eventually you may end up being like, hey, I could kill any of you on my end step.
Yeah,
like,
no.
who wants to make a deal?
Yep.
And or I'm just going to win now. That's obviously like one of the benefits of Proliferate. You get to pick where you're adding counters, and you don't necessarily have to kill everybody, even if you have the opportunity, etc.
No, I
make Prince Maker or whatever, you know.
The let's make a deal statement is perfect with Proliferate because people do have other cards that they're playing with counters on them, or have poison counters, and you know, maybe you give them a +1/+1 counter, maybe you up a loyalty, maybe you don't give them that one poison counter or protection for a turn or whatever it is. But making deals in EDH is, I mean, obviously one super fun part of the game and a very important part.
Yes, I think. Very important, very, very important. That is one of my favorite things to do with Proliferate. It's just like, I have a Chaos deck that I play, and there's a couple of Proliferate cards in there. And essentially, you know, just adding counters to random things just for fun really adds some, like, you know, additional spice to the game.
Yeah, you can make friends while you're battling everyone.
You can. So yeah, I think this deck is, like, super interesting for all of the reasons that we described. I also think that there's a lot of budget options available in this deck, you know, besides some of the staples in EDH that you probably already have. But I think that it's like a very, very cool take on Atraxa. Obviously, Planeswalkers being the =1 thing. Try that and then switch to this.
Yeah, at least one game. Go off one game.
Yeah,
and then, you know, don't torment everyone.
Yeah. He didn't mind for an extended period of time tormenting people.
Yeah.
He had to claw those marks into our souls so that you don't have to. Try this deck out when you get a chance. We'll have the deck list down in the description below for you to take a look at. And if you want to play around with numbers and see exactly what the specifics of all the cards are in here and tweak it for your own purposes, you're welcome to do so.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us in the Bulkhead. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, until next time.